recording now. Just want to check I've got it mute.
No problem. If we can just make sure that the YouTube is on.
Hi, Chairperson. Yes, Tafsir is commented in the chat that it's on.
Okay, thank you so much. Members, I'm going to just quickly mute everyone so that I can start. Okay, mute all. Okay. Welcome everyone today to the Finance and Transnet also briefed us on that day. And as chairperson, I've also personally visited Ankerlig station of Eskom, and I've also met with Transnet officials to engage with them and to hear their views on the importation of liquid natural gas. And this is essentially why we are here today. It's because if you are a member of the public, or if you are someone who do not necessarily have the specific energy and technical expertise, then the Western Cape LNG study can look like an enormous task to undertake, to comprehend in terms of its content and the possible implications thereof. And with that, I would like to welcome the department, especially the energy game changer with us here today to do the presentation for us. And I would also like to extend a special welcome to Saldanha Bay IDZ officials, to Eskom officials, as well as Transnet officials. I've invited them today to this presentation, even though they won't be presenting, because the contents and implication of the contents may impact upon their operations. And I do believe that we're going to have a close-knit working relationship in the years to come when it comes to importation of liquid natural gas. First, I'm just going to table the apology of the department, head of department, Mr. Furi. He has unfortunately had to apologize due to unexpected circumstances coming up. And first, I'm going to ask that members, if you could please introduce yourselves. And then I'm just going to ask that those presenting introduce themselves from the department, and that the department can introduce themselves if they are also then speaking throughout the meeting. And I'm also just going to ask that perhaps the lead person from Saldanha, Eskom and Transnet also introduce themselves, just so that everyone can get to know them. Possibly just put your video on quickly and then off again. And then general rules, we are going to, I've already muted everyone. Just please take cognizance that we are on YouTube today. Further, if you are presenting or if you are speaking, you're welcome to put your mic on, you're welcome to put your video off. I just ask that you please put your video and mic off afterwards as well. You're welcome to raise your hand if you have a question or if you have a point of order. I just please ask that you please lower your hand afterwards. That will also help prevent me from having to do that on your behalf then. And members, if you could just please keep your mics muted throughout the committee meeting, just so that we don't hear any background noise. Members, I will obviously after the presentation allow for questions and answers, and I hope that we have a wonderful and productive meeting today. Members, I'm going to ask that you please introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Chair. Goeiemôre almal. Dylan Mitchell.
Morning, Honourable Mitchell.
Morning, Chair. Andrigus van der Westhuizen.
Morning, Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Morning, Chairperson, and everybody here this morning. My name is Nomi Nkondlo, member of the committee.
Thank you, Honorable Nkondlo.
Morning, Chairperson. I'm Lulama Mvimbi.
Welcome, Honorable Mvimbi. It's always wonderful having you here with us today. Okay. With that, I don't see any other members on the screen. So I'm going to then now ask that the department please introduce themselves.
Good morning, Joanne Johnston from DDAT.
Welcome, Ms. Johnson. Are you going to be leading the presentation for us?
AJ Trickham is going to Honourable Member.
Okay, no problem. AJ, Mr. Trickham, with that, I'm just going to allow you to hop in afterwards. But first, I'm just going to allow for Saldanha, Eskom, and Transnet to also just introduce themselves today, yeah, because they are very special guests with us today as well. Thank you. I'll start with Saldanha.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, honourable members and guests. It's Kasia Fabukas. I'm the CEO of Saldanha Bay IDZ. Thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Beekers. Transnet, Eskom, are you here? I think I saw some of you enter the meeting earlier.
Yes, good morning from Transnet. Thank you, Madam Chair. With me, my name is Sue Lund. I'm General Manager at Transnet. And with me on the call is Jabulani Sitole, Sifiso Madola, and Donovan Hart. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you so much for being with us here today. Eskom, I see Mr. Singh just entered into the meeting actually also, and Mr. Oh, there we go. You unmuted yourself. Welcome.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, honourable members. I'm Kopiso Mawunonyani. I'm from Eskom, currently responsible for the portfolio of projects in the province. I'll be representing Eskom this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I saw your colleague, Mr. Singh, also just entered the meeting as well. But with that, Mr. Trickham, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Just by way of introduction, my name is confirm when I project that you are able to see my screen. So give me a minute and I'll do that.
I can see the screen. You just need to put it into presentation mode. There we go. It's in presentation mode. Mr. Trickham, I'm also going to put my video off just so that it's easier for connectivity. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me begin by just acknowledging, I think, the energy security game changer, which came to an end in March 2020. This work has been a continuation of efforts before I joined the department, starting in 2013, and has been supported quite actively by the security game changer under the leadership of Dr. Hildegard Fast. Just to also acknowledge Joanne Johnston, who's our and the HOD and the minister who've been also supporting the project, and the Premier, as you mentioned, Chair. I just want to acknowledge that. So I'll just dive into the presentation. The purpose of this briefing is to brief the committee on the feasibility study that we conducted. And I'll cover some background, but I'll also cover the status of the actual document itself. It's quite difficult to digest. It's over a 400-page document, and it took over 1.5 years to produce, and had various stages in its development. And I'll get to that as we go through the presentation. So, in terms of the rationale behind natural gas importation into the province, so. Since 2012, 2013, the Western Cape government have been promoting and actively looking at the case for natural gas into the Western Cape. And there are a number of reasons we've been doing this. So the first one is we want to really benefit from the socioeconomic benefits that can be obtained from gas-based industrialization. So basically what we're saying there is that there's an industrialization objective behind introduction of gas into the Cape. And there's some numbers that we put to that, which we'll come to later on in the presentation. We're also very keen on being able to switch to cleaner fuels. So natural gas is a cleaner fuel, specifically in a number of different areas. So from an environmental perspective in terms of direct emissions, but also from a greenhouse gas perspective. And therefore it reduces our carbon footprint. So the idea there is to move along a path of lower carbon, and we're very excited that we're also working with our colleagues in DA and DP who are looking to scenarios up into 2050 for low carbon pathways. So that's a piece of work that they just kicked off. On the third point there, we want to look at how it can also assist us in achieving an energy secure future. And what that means is how could it contribute towards the energy security of the province? And I'll delve into that a little bit more later. The fourth point is that gas to power works very well with solar and wind energy as it provides flexible dispatch. What that means is in an electricity system, specifically amongst various generators, the availability of solar and wind is variable, dependent on the resource itself. And because of that variability, you often need some sort of other supplementary generation or supplementary storage to provide for those parts where the variability of that resource is low. And gas, because of its quick response times in terms of startup, is ideal to provide for that kind of flexible dispatch. So that's the object. That's the point there. As I mentioned previously, that the studies had begun before my time at Western Cape Government, but to illustrate, I think we had started on this process around 2012. And we had started off with a pre-feasibility report for the importation of gas into the province. And this was a very detailed document. At the time, it was fairly early on in terms of the natural gas landscape in the country. And it looked at specific industries and was quite rich in terms of its granularity. It looked at particular areas that could be demand nodes. Obviously, Saldanha is the first one, but there were other areas that were considered as well. Atlantis, midway between Saldanha and City of Cape Town, the City of Cape Town itself. But then there was also areas in Drakensberg and what was considered around Mosul Bay. And since then, there's been a development around some of the other considerations. And the first one was what would the environmental issues and safety requirements look like around this kind of infrastructure and potential pipeline infrastructures to feed Atlantis and Cape Town. And we undertook a study in 2014 that looked at exactly that. It was done by the CSR, who incidentally have also just completed a strategic environmental assessment for pipelines across the country, and that's also been published. And then we undertook an assessment of some of the marine conditions in the Port of Saldanha. This was done at around the same time that similar studies were also conducted through PetroSA and a number of others, I believe also through Transnet at the time. We looked at the marine environmental conditions for LNG shipment and transport operations also at the same time. And then in 2015, we looked at the socioeconomic impact of LNG, importing LNG into the Western Cape. After that, we undertook a study looking at evaluating the risks. This included contractual risks and other risks that might present themselves. And then in 2016, 17, we wanted to undertake a further feasibility study, looking also at the entire opportunity, given that we had from a national landscape the absence of a integrated resource plan at the time, and there was a lot of market uncertainty. So our attempts at the time were to provide more market certainty around the LNG opportunity in the Western Cape. And we were fortunate to have secured some funding from USTDA at the time to advance the project and look at market changes. We at the time we did not have a clear path of development that had been identified, so we had explored two alternative paths of development, and I'll come into that a little bit later into the actual study itself. But also to say that in terms of the demand analysis, we also looked at a supporting study around the transport sector, which was the last study that was done last year through eScience that we funded, and really looking at a little bit more detail and potential opportunities in the transportation sector for LNG. To illustrate a map of the West Coast to indicate some of the potential industrial areas that we considered as the bigger nodes of gas demand. We've got the area obviously in the proximity of Saldanha Bay, where there's heavy industry located, but also in the sort of immediate vicinity around Piketberg, Riebeek West. There's a couple of opportunities for gas development there as well. And then the major node in Atlantis for the Atlantis industrial area. And then we see a number of different industrial areas in the Cape Town region. And we've just given you an indication of what all the areas in the Cape Town region that were considered for part of the study. And the approach for the study was facilitated through a contractual arrangement between USTDA and a consortium. The process that we had followed was around USTDA's contractual processes, and we had evaluated a number of proposals that had come through an evaluation committee, and the consultancy that was selected to undertake the study based on the proposal was a consortium led by a company called Delphos. And the consortium comprised of a number of specialists, Delphos themselves and FTI, who undertook the economic and financial models as well as the risk analysis. We were fortunate to have Granhearn, who are an offshoot of another company called KBR. These two companies are prominent in gas infrastructure development in specifically in the US. And then we had a company called PRDW, who are a group of local marine engineers who undertook most of the technical costing and siting locations within the Saldanha Bay area. And lastly, we had Weber Wenzel, who had locally done significant pieces of work on legal and regulatory issues surrounding natural gas, as well as contractual models of development. So that was the specialities that comprised within the consortium that came forward. In terms of the approach, there was a close integration of all the task outputs. This was facilitated through the department, but also through constant communication with Delphos and the team, considering that at the time when we began the study, that there was no certainty around the integrated resource plan. We also looked at evidence-based support through detailed modeling and decision support tools to test some of these assumptions, to look at what potential disruptive influences that could arise, and also to look at some of the key policy positions which we had tested through the models and then presented in the feasibility study itself. In terms of the key tasks of the study, The first task was to look at gas market demand analysis. So, building on the work that was done in the first pre-feasibility study, is to look at what were the potential further opportunities, what would that demand look like into the future, and can we provide some sort of projection of what that demand would look like. The second point was around looking at a broader socioeconomic impact beyond that which was done in 2015, to look at other potential areas that could benefit. And then the third element, which is really part of the core, is undertaking some techno-economic financial analysis, and that comprised of the technical costings, but also around some of the financial basis for opportunities that developers and others might seek to take forward into the next stage of the study. We then undertook a risk analysis, looking at what are the potential risks involved, and I'll present a slide on that a little bit later. But we also looked at the legislative and regulatory analysis, and we almost started with some agreements on some of the legislative and regulatory analysis that informed some of the contractual models that took off from the techno-economic financial analysis. I know it's a mouthful, but I'll explain as we go through. The contracting models and the term sheet templates, so these were developed to form a basis around potential agreements that might occur post the study, but also as a room to develop for any of the bodies that wish to contract in terms of the various agreements that need to be made for this for the study. There was also some effort made on U.S. sources of supply. This was a requirement by USTDA in terms of all of their contracts, is to look at potential areas where US companies could form part of the supply chain. And then the last point was around a decision support model, which is basically an Excel-based model, very comprehensive, that looks at all aspects of the study, but also allows us to adjust where and how we feel necessary. I'm going to move into the gas demand analysis. So in terms of the study, when we began the study, we had gone into an analysis that had presented, it presented itself as firstly around 1.2 megatons per annum of natural gas demand, and rising to 2.7, and then subsequent to that, as we adjusted, we were able to zone in and at least present a demand profile of 2.1 rising to 2.8 megatons per annum in 2050. This is all premised on the start date of 2024 for the project, and looking at a period of around 3 to 4 years of necessary development that might be required to get the infrastructure up and running. What you'll notice in terms of this profile is that the consistent dark blue area in the bottom here is related to the power sector, and typically in most LNG projects across the world, power is what is referred to as the anchor demand, and that is what is indicated by this. What we are very pleased to see was, in terms of the study, was that the industrial demand would be almost equivalent in terms of the quantities as the power sector, but that the industrial demand would increase over the period, aligned to our initial objective, which was that of gas-based industrialization. Also because the multiplier effect of jobs coming out of that area is higher than just the single point use of gas to power. In terms of the transportation sector and the commercial sector, for transportation, the demand was fairly consistent, and there's some sensitivities. I'll talk to that in a minute. But then there was also a small amount of usage in the commercial sector, and even tiny amount of usage in the residential sector. So these are all relative to the kind of volumes that might be required in the various aspects of the economy. The projections were developed based on a base case. And the base case was calibrated using interviews with potential major industry users around the West Coast corridor and all major Saldanha industries at the time. So the consultants had, together with DDAT, consulted with a number of the major players along the West Coast, but also consulted with various developers and LNG companies in the area to look at what their prospects and what their particular interest areas have been, what kind of work had they done, and as I said, to calibrate the modeling work that was undertaken. On the perspectives of gas demand, the first key outtake here is that power generation is a critical anchor offtake. We had premises on the Uncle conversion, but we also looked at the potential opportunity of an independent power producer, either located in Saldanha or in Atlantis. And the reason for the two different opportunities was because of the uncertainty with regards to the IRP, but also for different models of development. So if the potential opportunity arose for the gas IPP program to kickstart sooner, then the 1,000 megawatt plant that we had modeled for an IPP, either in Saldanha or in Atlantis, would be the route that the feasibility would then continue upon. So we had done the groundwork leading into that. And then the dependency was also on the first one around what the agreed capacity factor of that power station would be. And we've noted that in terms of the demand sensitivities that you would see on the right-hand side. The second key outtake is that the investment prospects would be overtaken by growth in industrial demand. So this was based on some of the work that the consultants had undertaken in other studies elsewhere. And that really is that as gas becomes available, it starts developing further investment opportunities for industry that is based on gas. And what is referred to as chunky investment prospects is really around what those industries, potentially new industries, would form part of that projected gas demand. This is again related to GDP growth rate, and that's why you note that on the demand sensitivities, that's a second element here. Additional to that would be the technical substitution rate, and that sensitivity is really around the ability for industries to be able to switch from existing technology that utilizes either coal or heavy fuel oils, which are dirtier, to make the investments that might be required for them to change over to utilization of natural gas. In some cases, these might be simple refurbishments, but in other cases, it might require a whole new investment and opportunity. The third important outtake was that transportation usage, which was investigated, was really quite small, except for the case for long-haul freight usage. And we've seen this opportunity in our transport study. And it really only illustrated that the opportunity for passenger transport was only for captive fleets, where you would have, for example, a fleet of vehicles either owned by a particular entity or similar to a fleet that a municipality might have, or a fleet that a rental agency might have. But again, overall, relative to the other demands, fairly small, and also requiring investment in terms of infrastructure for forecourts, etc., that might be required, and that's why captive fleets was seen to be the opportunity there, and the long haul freight was the opportunity there. We've seen a number of these type of opportunities in the Gauteng region, existing in the Gauteng region. The last point is around marine bunkering that could be significant. So this is relative to the what is referred to as MARPL, but it's environmental legislature around marine shipping, and how the marine industry, from a global point of view, wishes to shift away from the heavy use of heavy fuel oils and diesel into lighter fuels like natural gas, and potentially even green hydrogen, as is the current trend. And the sensitivity around that is around the percentage of vessels that might require LNG bunkering in Saldanha Bay, that might provide an opportunity for further bunkering on natural gas within the Saldanha Bay area. On the outcomes of the socio-economic impact analysis that was conducted, the key outtake here was that up to 2050, we'd see a GDP benefit of about $9.5 billion US, and this comprised of a number of iterations with using the social accounting matrix that the department has. So there was also interlinking to the Western Cape social accounting matrix developed as part of a project done for City of Cape Town. So the benefit we had is that we had a good, well-developed economic model that was integrated into the work done by these consultants. They were then able to utilize that model to come up with that numbers. They looked at where reinvestment would happen into the economy. They looked at areas where it could happen in the report, and so there is more detail, but just the overall numbers there was 9.5 billion developed. From an employment point of view and jobs perspective, the numbers we had looked at was around 403,000 person hours was how the model computed it, but essentially that works out to around 13,000 full-time equivalent jobs. Unfortunately, the nature of the work required here would be in the space of skilled and semi-skilled opportunities. So 90% of those were in the skilled and semi-skilled opportunities. And in the study, we had also given an indication of income level, income brackets that these would fall in. So a large portion of that would fall in the high income bracket, but also some in the medium income bracket at that stage. The fuel cost savings, so typically this is not just the use of the switch of fuels from heavier fuels to natural gas in power sector, but also in the industrial and other sectors. And just to give you an indication that the proportion of fuel cost savings in this number that could be attributed to the Unkellig power station conversion would be around $16.4 billion over the period. So just about half of the fuel cost savings are attributed to Unkellig and its conversion. The displacement of electricity that we had modeled was around around 450,000 gigawatt hours of electricity that would have been produced. And then we had some benefits of water savings, and then obviously the lower carbon objective of emissions reductions of 907,000 tons per year. This was dependent on the national CO2 emissions factor that was utilized. In terms of the technology options and the marine siting options, the previous studies in 2015 that were undertaken, not just by PetroSA Transnet and IPP office, had identified a number of locations within the bay where we showed potential for a terminal. Of the 3 options that were then advanced in terms of this study, 2 of the options were sitting closer to the port, and the 3rd option sat across the bay near the Donkergat Peninsula. Of these 3 options, the 3rd option would require a subsea pipeline that would go under the water into the bay to that area. And then options 1 and 2, one of them required a submerged pipeline, and the other one would have some onshore facilities available. So those are the 3 options we had looked at as part of the study, and we had discounted, I think there were 2 additional options that had presented themselves at this time. Just to note that there is an existing LPG terminal in the bay, and the area that was demarcated for LNG use, potential LNG use, was consistent with the port development plans, and so this was the area that had been identified within the bay. This just gives you an illustration of some of the various development areas within the port that we had obtained from TNP at the time, and gives you some of the areas that were also looked at in terms of the location in the port. In terms of the capital expenditure estimates, so there are a number of capital expenditure estimates that come through in the report because of the 3 options that were presented. We've looked then further at the opportunity around one of those options, which was the shallow water import terminal, and then we've used the configuration is that of utilizing what is referred to as a floating storage regasification unit, and abbreviated here as FSRU. And typically this can be leased. So at this stage we put a zero cost in terms of capex for that. And an FSRU is essentially a tanker, a previous tanker that had been retrofitted, that has come to its end of life, and be retrofitted as a basically an import vessel that allows for a tanker to offload its cargo into that as part of storage and importation infrastructure that might be required. In terms of the transmission pipeline that we had looked at, so this would be the pipeline basically from Saldanha through to Atlantis. The capex cost estimates were in the region of about $195,000, and then the conversion of Unkelug that we had estimated, and this was the cost conversions at the time for conversion to combined cycle. At the moment, Unkelug runs in an open cycle configuration. A combined cycle configuration boosts the output of electricity that can be obtained from Unkelug to almost twice the size. So right now, I think it's just over 1,000 megawatts. It would boost it to just over 2,000 megawatts in terms of its capacity after conversion. And that, you can see, comprises the most significant capex item in terms of this estimate. Some of the contractual models of development, we had looked at 2 models of development, an unbundled and a bundled approach. And the significant difference here is the bundled approach was an approach that has been followed through the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy's Gas Independent Power Producer Program, because it looks at a complete turnkey solution and is centered on a power purchase agreement and a price point that is bid by developers into that kind of program. The unbundled approach, which what we have here, offers opportunities for various players within the marketplace to be able to operate in this format. Key to this would be the gas company, which is in the center here, And that really is the main vessel that many of the various entities would then contract with. So you could have Eskom, for example, contracting with that gas company. You may have the DPE having some sort of implementation agreement that would be required to support that gas company. And at this stage, we didn't want to identify which companies would be best suited for this, but really to provide the framework around what kind of contractual agreements might be required for various companies to be able to participate in the development of the opportunity. We also looked at an additional potential power company that might want to contract with that gas company. This could be specifically a power company that would then provide power to some of the industries, or it could even be a company that would provide power to a municipality, for example. We also have the direct offtake with industrial companies, direct offtake with transport companies, and then the additional opportunity for Eskom to then sell some of their power to another power company, and the relationship with the Department of Energy, really looking at potential opportunities around some of the contractual agreements there. On the upstream side, there would be a requirement for a concession agreement with the Transnet Ports Authority. You would also have to have a pricing agreement with an LNG supplier, and then obviously a leasing agreement, as we spoke about, around an FSRU provider, really around securing the infrastructure, upstream infrastructure and port infrastructure that might be required. On a bundled approach, so here we had looked at Eskom, or the Department of Energy, that would be the buyer of that electricity coming out of an independent power producer, typically through a power purchase agreement that would be finalized. But that there are a couple of very similar kind of agreements that need to be made by the project sponsors with an LNG supplier. You would again need some of the same kind of considerations around FSRU charters, etc. In terms of the study, what we had done additional is we had in the unbundled case, we had split up some of the cost elements within the study, so that a gas company versus a power company could then identify some of the financial considerations that they might want to look at going into the future, and some of the internal rate of returns that might be opportune for them to engage in the project with. Moving on to some of the considerations on the approach. So if you go through an unbundled opportunity, you could also look at the domestic sale of gas through a gas company, whereas with a bundled opportunity, you could have gas and power all bundled together. So an industrial user would have to purchase from LNG through an international supplier and not through a localized gas company. This could have some implications on costs as well for additional costs through a bundle program, whereas it might have less cost through a gas company. The IPP program would avoid any kind of gas price regulation, but would be subject to the price of electricity, similar to the kind of price regulations that would occur through the NERSA's MYPD program at the moment. On the unbundled approach, the gas project is self-standing, with Eskom being one of the gas companies, so potentially the anchor customer, as we put here. But what that does is also de-risks the opportunity. So from some of the consultations that the consortium had during the project, they had met with international finance bodies and some local finance companies, which expressed a preference for the unbundled approach from a risk perspective. And I'll get to the risk because we have a slide that talks to the risk. But also to look at the unbundled approach also looks at a situation where the aggregator and the generator are independent of one another. So it's not bundled into one company. Whereas in the bundled approach, the company is one integrated company. There are pros and cons around either option. And then on the unbundled approach, there's an issue around conflict of interest, as currently Eskom, how it's configured, is vertically integrated. Whereas with an unbundled approach, you have less of that issue. And then also you might have the opportunity of an easier procurement program because of the IPP procurement aspect. So it's the number of agreements that need to be taken into account when doing a project of this nature is simpler when you're looking at a bundled program. So those are the considerations on just the models of development that we had undertaken in terms of the study. In terms of the risk heat map, there are a couple of key risks here. So the higher risks are around currency and global markets. A lot of this development work is subject to that. So we've seen already since the study was published that we've seen some currency volatility, but this is typical to most infrastructure projects of this size, this nature. We also have a risk around LNG price indexation. So if it's indexed to the crude oil price, we've seen over the years that the LNG price actually varies. There's periods where the correlation between the price points of LNG and the price points of crude oil converge, and there's areas where it diverges. So we've seen some information around that, but that is a risk. It's a risk because the landed price of gas then offers the opportunity from a cost perspective, for various industries to be able to then put forward their plans for refurbishment, specifically around the cost benefits of LNG relative to other fuels. And then the other significant risk was the pipeline routing, and that is really subject to a number of the environmental considerations that are undertaken in that area, and that's where the strategic environmental assessment that was done through Operation Pakisa was very useful. It brings down some of the risks associated with the pipeline routing, because it reduces the cost for any developers having undertaken some of that developmental work already, and potentially reduce the time required to get the kind of environmental approvals required for that. There are other significant high risks. The one is around Eskom collapse. Very real risk given our current financial support of state-owned entities. The latest update we have is 480 billion rand of debt that Eskom has to service, and then there's some contractual risk that exists around contractual and project-related risks that exist. So some of the defaults that might occur under some of the agreements, interest rate concerns. The country intends to adopt a carbon tax, and what that might mean for gas, as it's still a fossil fuel, even though it's lower carbon. There's obviously in order to prepare the port, there's some considerations around the dredging that's required within the basin to be able to support the turning circle of an LNG tanker in that area. So those are some of the risks that exist there. Some of the impacts, again, these are project related, and it relates really to the infrastructure development. But a key one here is the government of South Africa default and termination of credit. That's the one external one that is not project related. That's key here. I'm going to move on to The current state of development. So since the study had been concluded, our approach has been to look at two streams of development. The one is on the large-scale LNG development. So continuing on from the feasibility study is to develop the large-scale infrastructure opportunity. We had seen to seek funding through the DBSA under a program called IPSA, the Infrastructure Program for South Africa, that is funded through the EU. And we have been working together with Transnet on some of the work involved there, really trying to develop concrete terms of reference, because there are various studies that are being undertaken. So our work with Transnet has really been to take that forward. Transnet would then make the application to IPSA for that funding and seek to be part of the development of that infrastructure going forward. Additional to that, we're looking to validate the demand, and we've seen some changes since we started the study, some significant changes in the demand. On the one hand, we've seen the closure of ArcelorMittal in Saldanha Bay, which was one of the key demand opportunities in Saldanha, but also the potential development of new greenfields opportunities that might present itself in the greater Saldanha region. On Eskom, we had been seeking to look at how we can solidify that anchor gas opportunity through a feasibility study, specifically looking at LNG importation for Untitled. We've been working with them and trying to get to a point where we could support their business case for the conversion of Untitled to natural gas under its current configuration as a stepwise approach towards either combined cycle gas development. Under the current configuration, there are still some fuel savings that might develop it there, but the issue would be under what regime of operation would warrant that kind of infrastructure development. The small-scale ecosystem development. So we've seen, because of the rising electricity prices and the reliability issues, we've seen that the market is starting to develop with a number of developers emerging, looking at opportunities not just in servicing industry who are looking to become more resilient and have their own options for power reliability. This is beyond just the cost of diesel power generation, but with deep levels of load shedding, are there more reliable and cheaper and easier solutions? We've also seen some developers seeking to put some submissions into the recently released risk mitigation power procurement program of the National Department of Minerals and Energy. And we've engaged with a number of small-scale developers. I've listed a couple there, but there are many others. On some of the stakeholder engagements, we've had some engagements with Petro SA, but we're also seeking to have further engagements with some of the companies listed there. Sasol, MOGS are part of the shareholders of the current LPG terminal that exists in Saldanha. VTTI are some of the shareholders of the Bergen terminal in the port of Cape Town, and others. And then on the industry side is just seeking to understand what industry needs are and how that demand validation part could be supported in a phased approach, at least until we get to the full-scale LNG, large-scale LNG infrastructure development. So on that, on our way forward, we have a memorandum of cooperation with Transnet. I've said before that we would really like Transnet to submit an application to DBSA to follow on to undertake follow-on development work. Again, that terms of reference is a focus that we've been wanting to develop. Their focus from Transnet side, and I can refer to Sue and to Jabulani to speak about this as well. But their focus has been undertaking infrastructure development at Richards Bay, and some of the regulatory issues that they've been able to work through their current transaction advisor, but also that they've been working at an importation solution for the country, and they presented as such at our previous meeting in Saldanha around utilization of existing infrastructure and potential benefits of a phased approach. Working with Eskom, we currently awaiting a mandate from Eskom internally. So in principle, we've got agreement and we've had good engagements with Eskom up to date. It would, as I mentioned, it would contribute to Eskom's business case for conversion, but also would start looking at potential opportunities of some of the small-scale infrastructure that might lead then into the large-scale infrastructure development, but that you would already have a development of a gas economy in the Western Cape, so that when the large-scale infrastructure is on stream, that you already have a market to service. So some of the continuing lobbying and advocacy efforts. So to seek clarity on RP 2019 implementation, specifically on gas and gas IPP program. At this stage, we've heard that NERSA have evidence through articles in the press are that NERSA has concurred with the second gas determination released by the minister, and so we're waiting finality on that determination from the minister's office, and then that would then allow for instructions to the IPP office on the gas IPP program. And then we mentioned the project developers on opportunities for the risk mitigation power procurement program. That RFP was just released over the weekend on Saturday and is looking for first power to present itself by June 2022 is the timeline. And various project developers, depending on their technologies, may be able to meet that timeline. And then, yes, just to continue to lobby for Saldanha to be included in the gas IPP program. There were 3 ports that were identified: Richards Bay, Kucha, and Saldanha. And we're also aware that there's a feasibility underway for Kucha for LNG gas importation. It's been referred to previously by the Minister Mantashe around importation of gas as the first port for importation of gas into the country. I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trickham. Members, I'm going to allow for questions and to the department now. And because we also have special guests with us today, what I'm going to do is once the members are done, I'm going to allow for Saldanha, Eskom and Transnet to also pose any questions they may have to the department, because I do think that because they're going to be affected by any of this implementation, that it's important for us to also just hear their views on the presentation. But members, I'm going to take your hands first. Going once, going twice. Honourable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chair. Out of this 400 and something bedtime reading, as you refer, Chair, you know, I'm generally a sleepist, So, you know, I'm very bad with bedtime stories or readings. Let me say I've got a couple of questions, Chair, but I think what I'll do, if indeed in terms of time, some I'm unable, I can always submit them. In just trying, because yes, indeed, the document, you know, with a pedestrian knowledge becomes very difficult to understand and comprehend. And let me thank Mr. Trickham, you know, for always having the ability to simplify things, you know, that one can be able to even follow, even if you are not an expert. You know, so they will pardon my questions if some of them becomes very simplistic. I will raise some and then I will put some on hold on your behest, Chair. The couple of ones that I have, firstly, is that listening to the presentation early on, I think I got an understanding that in terms, I think there's a slide on the socio-economic benefit, I think that speaks about, I think the alignment thereof to industrialization. So my question, I think, to the presenters and what came out of the study is that one looks at where we are as a country, you know, both in terms of our economy that is, and for some time now have been growing at a very slow pace and compounded now with the COVID. I think I want to ask, one, what is in that prospect, because I think prospect of that was raised, I think it's more, you know, your scenarios that we're putting. When one looks at that same study with those eyes, you know, in the current environment that we are in, I picked up, I think, some of the issues that Mr. Trickham was raising about, you know, the dynamics after you were trying to validate the demand of the closure of ArcelorMittal and all of that. I think my biggest question here with my long-winded question is that, one, I'm interested to know that the type of projections that are being made, you know, over a 10-year period, can we still be able, you know, to realize those, you know, in the current, especially post COVID? What would be some of the challenges in that regard? That's the first one. Number two, considering, I think, the project and the study, you know, and the interest of the US, I think, which has been indicated earlier on, you know, in financing, you know, this particular study about their interest to have US-based companies, you know, in the supply chain. So what I'm interested to know there, what would then be the implication for local content in that regard, and also from a competition point of view? I mean, our Competition Act is there. If now we were to have other players, you know, in terms of other foreign countries, you know, want to play in the space, you know, would this particular indication of the US, and obviously I'm sure there would be legislative and regulatory issues that we have dealt with through Weber-Wentzel, you know, so when you have to start now contracting, if you were to take that particular option, would it have any particular constraints in regard to, you know, the issues of local content and also, you know, opening up space for other countries that may bring in competitive, whether pricing or any other? The other one I'm interested to understand, Chair, is that I hear, perhaps this one also Eskom can indicate, I think, about the conversion of Unkelech, you know, to LNG. And I got in the way forward that I think Didet would also be interested to participate and contribute there. But I just want to understand, what are the current plans, both by the Department of Public Enterprises and Eskom regarding, I think, Unkelech, is this particular conversation, you know, yielding to such a possibility, or, you know, there is a different arrangement, including in the recent, I think it was 2019, you know, the finally approved IRP. So I'm interested to understand that. Let me put the last one for this particular round, Chair. You know, one of my one of my issues regarding, these kind of investment-led approaches or infrastructure-driven growth, and once again, just as a pedestrian, as a simple person, I'm always, astounded at the investment that goes, and I think because I always use my socio-economic eyes to say, as a country, what do we need? As a province, what do we need, especially in the current situation? So one of the things that is highlighted, we need jobs. Now, I'm trying to understand the spend in the infrastructure, because I think, and also the value which is indicated there of a potential billions. I think it's about 19 billion if I've read it well there in terms of the GDP value. But the number of jobs is 13,000 jobs. And I understand the issue of the skill profile, but I'm really need to be convinced about this kind of a scenario when it comes to these capital investment projects. That why, if you look at the scale, and I'm using just the numbers here, if you look at the scale of the investment, if you look at, what in rand value, what will be depicted, as what is needed to get this particular investment. But what you gain out of it, and I'm raising it, if you talk about 13,000 in South Africa, that at this point, we're actually going, the last time, I think in the recent labor force survey, we got, I think we're almost at 30%, of unemployment. So we need serious number of jobs. And for me, I think this is something that I'm interested to understand. How do we explain this? And the type of skills, as the indication is made, that 90% or almost 90% of these jobs is a high level skilled with semi-skilled. Now, I would ask, in this particular project, given where we are as the country and as the province in terms of our skills profile, is that how long will it take? Have we done some kind of a skills auditing of where South Africa is in terms of the requisite LNG related skills? Where are we in terms of fitting, towards that skills demand? If there is any gap, how much time would we need to cultivate such skill so that we ensure participation? Because once again, in my area, because I'm always interested in this infrastructure-led growth, is that one of the challenges of the trickle effect that is assumed, with this investment, is that if you do not have this particular skills become one of the challenges. If you don't have the domestic country does not have the requisite, human capital, sometimes it misses, the opportunity of that investment, and you would see it in the jobs and also in the skill, because indeed you are bringing something that requires a high skill participation in this regard. So I'm interested as a second part in terms of that question of what kind of skills audit has been done at this point, if any. And I'm sure there's a lot that has been done by DHEAD, in terms of scarce and critical skills list. So for me, has that been incorporated in the study or sitting somewhere? And where are we, if indeed this project, were to take off in terms of ensuring, participation? Let me end there for now, Chair. I can come back, I think, later on so that I can allow also other members to be able to ask questions.
No problem. Thank you, Honourable Nkondlo. Apologies, please ignore my coughing. I've been recovering from flu from the past week. Honourable van der Westhuizen, you're next.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much, not only for the presentation, but also for those that decided for the study to be undertaken. I mean, this is, as far as I know, where such projects all start, is with a feasibility study, etc. Just a few questions then on the presentation. The first one is, we know about the sorry tale of ArcelorMittal in Saldanha, and my first question is, you haven't referred to them. You did say you consulted with the major industries in Saldanha, but ArcelorMittal used to be such a big role player. And I can just imagine that they would be quite interested in any savings in terms of energy costs. So my first question is, would LPG represent a significant saving in energy costs over electricity? Because I do know that they cited obviously their costs were too high, and electricity or energy costs for a steel manufacturer seems to be one of their major cost drivers. The second one is, it seems to be as if we are currently somewhat in the hands of Transnet, and it's Transnet that needs to make that decision on whether they're going to start undertaking this significant investment and whether they will be taking on the risk. Now, my question is, to what extent, can we perhaps find other partners that might be willing, apart from Transnet? And secondly, to what extent can we take the next step? And that brings me to my following question. It seems to me the next step is now to first try and see if we can get a significant interest in such a project to attract investors, etc. But my question is, to what extent can the Western Cape government take the next step in terms of even perhaps design? And I've seen first signs of that, for example, where you've already given attention to the port design, etc. But the design of a pipeline, the environmental impact assessments that would be needed, wouldn't it help? Because that's quite often how developers, and I'm now referring more to property developers, how they work. They first get the rights established, obviously after they believe that it is economically feasible or viable. And then lastly, Chair, I was privileged to be involved some 6 years ago in the debate regarding a new piece of legislation that was driven by Minister Patel at the time, which is called the Infrastructure Development Act, Act 23 of 2014 eventually. And my question is just, wouldn't it be wise, wouldn't that be the route to go? The Infrastructure Development Act has got as its aim to provide for the facilitation, and I'm quoting from the preamble to the bill, to provide for the facilitation and coordination of public infrastructure development, which is of significant economic or social importance to the Republic, to ensure that infrastructure development in the public is given priority in planning, approval, and implementation. So this bill provides for the various role players to be brought together in a high-level committee, chaired by the president of the country, to ensure that, and I'm quoting again, that the development goals of the state are promoted through infrastructure development. So, Chair, perhaps if I can leave it with that, to what extent do you believe that this bill, act and the organs established through this act might be of benefit to a project of this magnitude? Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other hands? Okay, if there are no other hands, I'm going to then also ask my questions now, because some of my questions relate to either follow-ups or related to other members' questions, and also some questions that are related to the presentation then, and given that we don't have that many questions at the moment anyway. Firstly, I just want to find out the fast tracking of liquid natural gas for the Western Cape was one of the State of the Province address priorities, and obviously the Minister has also previously indicated is a priority for the Western Cape. But when you say the fast tracking of importation of LNG for the Western Cape and as a province, what does that mean practically? I know, for example, that money in the budget has been put aside for the fast tracking of IPPs in terms of helping municipalities. And I can kind of understand the practicalities on how the money will be used for that. But I just want to understand, when you look at the budget and when you look at what the Western Cape can do, given that this is a lot of its national mandates, what specifically do we mean as a province and how we can help fast track the importation of LNG? And where do you feel it is in the progress at the moment? And has the lockdown or COVID regulations and or pandemic affected any of the progression of this priority? Secondly, I want to find out, liquid natural gas is obviously the cleanest fossil fuel, much cleaner than, for example, liquid petroleum gas and so on. And I want to find out, how can LNG be beneficial for domestic use? Because when you are someone who doesn't necessarily have a business, one of your biggest concerns is maybe electricity. You would like some cheap electricity, and load shedding affects you. And for example, sometimes you're not necessarily always living on the city's grid. So not in the city, for example, one stage of load shedding can be avoided, but obviously that's only one stage, and many other municipalities in the Western Cape don't have that capability. How can we assist municipalities in terms of domestic use, if any, with the liquid natural gas importation? And then I just wanted to find out, you mentioned obviously the direct impact on jobs, that jobs can be created in the Western Cape. And I just want to find out, do you have any figures regarding the indirect impact? Because, for example, when you start getting a lot of jobs in an area, you start after thinking about things like catering, washing and laundromats. You have to start thinking about things like financial services, because a lot of people are then moving into that area. And especially if those direct jobs are about 90% skilled or semi-skilled, it also gives the impression that more finances will be injected in that area of the province. Further, I wanted to find out, the study mostly focused on the Untitled plant, but I wanted to find out, and perhaps Eskom might want to come in here if the department doesn't necessarily have the answers, which stations in South Africa and or the Western Cape specifically are more suited to quickly be converted to liquid natural gas. For example, I know that Untitled and Gerikwa stations were built with the vision of having liquid natural gas and converting to it in the future. And then further, in terms of the funding, is the only funding that is required that Transnet, that you hope that Transnet applies for the DB, SA and IPSA funding, and that Eskom approves in terms of its mandates, some infrastructure maintenance? Is there any other funding that you specifically require, and where will you get such funding? And in the study, you mentioned obviously there were about 3 options, obviously, and which option do you specifically prefer? Further, what is the possibility of converting Gerikwa, given that the study mostly focused on the Untitled plant? And then in terms of legislation and regulation on a provincial level, I want to know is there any provincial legislation or regulation that is required in order to fast track the importation of liquid natural gas? Because if that is so, I do feel that as a committee, we need to be aware of anything that might come our way in the future that we need to look forward to or start working on and so on. And then I think this is a question that I think is probably partly for the department, but perhaps Eskom and Transnet can also come in here if they wish. I know Eskom indicated that they may be doing a submission early February this year already regarding the conversion of the Untitled plant in order to make sure that the plant is able to handle the liquid natural gas requirements. And I just wanted to find out, has Eskom or Department of Public Enterprises approved the submission? Has the submission been made? I know obviously in March COVID and the regulations happened, so I'm not sure if the submission was actually made. And obviously the department has a memorandum with Transnet already, and I want to find out, because the memorandum needs to be renewed, how is the renewal of the memorandum coming along? And how does Transnet feel about submission of an application for funding for the developmental work? And then finding, I know that the rail sector in the particular area of Atlantis, Saldanha Bay, has been struggling over the years. And I wanted to find out, and perhaps Transnet can come in here, how could the importation of liquid natural gas assist Transnet in revitalizing the rail sector within the area, not only on an industrial level, but perhaps even on a tourism level if it is going to be revitalized. Yes, thank you. Those are my questions. But what I'll do is I'll allow the department to answer our questions first, and then I will give Saldanha and Eskom and Transnet also an opportunity to ask any questions that they have, or to perhaps provide any comments that they feel that they would like to provide on the presentation, or any particular views. Mr. Trickham, Ms. Johnson, I'll leave it up to you as to who will be answering the respective questions.
Honourable member, if it's okay, I'm going to ask AJ to first go, and then I will pick up anything and add, and then open it up to our colleagues in Eskom and Transnet, if that's okay.
No problem. That is perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. Let me begin with Honourable Nkondlo's questions. And forgive me if I haven't taken down the questions correctly, but I'll attempt to meet them, and maybe we can circle back on some of the questions if I haven't been able to clearly address them. The first question from Honourable Nkondlo was around the type of projections. Can we still realize the projections given the changes that we've experienced over the last 2 years? I think the most significant change here that we've experienced is the closure of AMSA at the moment. There was a significant demand both from an electricity point of view, but also from direct use of gas in their processes that was required in the steelmaking process. So the challenge is how to offset that loss in terms of demand that was already existing, with potential new demand that may come on stream. So in this area, we've had some meetings with business development in Saldanha Bay IDZ, which feels a number of the investment queries in the region as well, and had indicated to us that there may be potential new investments, large infrastructure investments in the area, but these are still not at a stage.
What happened there, Chairperson?
Members, I'll try to get the chairperson back. So long.
Hi, can you hear me?
You're back. Thank
Hi,
you.
okay,
But
so
our presenter also disappeared.
that's okay. Mr. Trickham, are you there? Okay.
I am here, Chair. May I continue?
You may continue. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure where I dropped off, but I think the issue right now is around many investors still assessing the impact of COVID currently. So I've not been privy to some of those challenges on the investments in the greater region, but it's anticipated that whatever our projections have been, that they would then be facilitated by new investments in the region. Again, that now needs adjustment based on the post-COVID challenges. Member Nkondlo, your second question around U.S. interest in supply chain. So to give you an indication, USTDA funding as a requirement have specified that there needs to be some indication of what potential opportunities there are for U.S. companies to engage in the project. This doesn't at all compromise any other players from any other countries to be able to participate, but in fact, what it might even lead to is leveraging of skills and leveraging of existing experience in the sector to the benefit of local companies that might wish to engage through whichever procurement or whichever company or entity supply chain processes that need to be taken. So in this study, we specifically didn't go into the details of any kind of potential transactions or any kind of potential supply chain elements, and all that was provided was areas where some U.S. companies could seek to engage really with some of the local companies around opportunities for joint actions, etc. So that's just related to supply chain. It does not specifically benefit any of the U.S. companies, and neither does it not benefit them. It's just a requirement that had to be met for the USTDA funding. On the third question around conversion of Unkellig and what Eskom's plans are, and I think it's related to one of your questions, Chair, that on the early February on the conversion of LNG. So the Eskom had released a request for information. I believe there were two, but a request for information on the conversion of Unkellig. And that is closed as well. And so they are in possession of further information. The work that we are follow-on work that we wanting to work with Eskom on, again also USTDA funded, is in support of the next step, which is a business case that they would need to develop for them to go out on an RFP for the conversion of Unkellig. So our work right now is really around that follow-on study, and the study is focused on what are the logistics and the requirements of infrastructure, both at a smaller scale, really to supply just Unkellig on its open cycle gas turbine configuration as it currently stands. And this could even take the part of what is referred to as a virtual pipeline, which is basically trucks that ferry LNG, but then it would also require some sort of storage facilities that may need to be constructed as well. So what are the opportunities for all of that? And that's the scope of work that we're seeking to support Eskom on right now. From Western Cape government side, the fast tracking that you're speaking to, Chair, is exactly this work. As an anchor customer, if we are able to facilitate the introduction of gas to that anchor, the development of the infrastructure along that supply then affords that infrastructure or that gas to be available to broader industries. It may be starting at a small scale, but already allows industries to start positioning themselves with relation to conversion of existing facilities to gas, and benefit from potential lower gas prices. On the fourth question around infrastructure-led development and growth and jobs and employment, this is an area that is been In terms of the study, specifically, the consultants looked at the South African Oil and Gas Alliance. They've done some work in this regard and are looking to undertake further work on the skills profile and the skills gap. So in the report that was published, they noted a couple of the following things: that there's a limited track of gas-related industries in South Africa, so there is a skills gap specifically in technical areas, but there are many skills that could be pivoted from the marine sector. So that's the first point. And then that local skills and capacity of artisans could be adequate in construction phase, but you would need some training and development for refrigeration technicians or engineers or biological technicians that might be required. The skills gap is higher for operations and maintenance of the project, and there's several roles that would need to be filled for which there's no current training or professional development pipeline in the country. So that would definitely need more development. And there's critical areas of development around LNG supervision, carrier captains, chiefs, etc. So that gap analysis has been undertaken, but this is as I said, SAOGA believes that it's just their first stab at it. They would seek to be doing an updated and more comprehensive piece of work, provided that they have funding to undertake that piece of work. I'm going to move on to Honourable van der Westhuizen's questions around AMSA. Yes, AMSA, as I mentioned, use LPG and use something called a specific type of gas which is generated from the use of coke. They could replace that with the use of LNG at the time, but given their closure, all of this demand actually falls away. They had previously been approached independently by a consortium known as IPCSA. However, the plans of IPCSA to develop a plant specifically for AMSA, I think didn't reach financial investment decision, financial investment close, and as a result, that whole initiative fell over. I think this was in 2016-17 was when the exclusivity of that contract expired. On Transnet and other parties, Honourable van der Westhuizen, the work that we've done at the stakeholder engagement point of view through the Energy Security Game Changer was exactly to explore the opportunity of which parties would provide the best avenue for us to develop the project further. And we had consulted with a number of companies, specifically state-owned enterprises, given that state-owned entities would be required to provide some sort of financial guarantees at some of the infrastructure areas that may be required. So this would be that they would make application to national treasuries for the kind of financial guarantees that are required for the scale of this kind of infrastructure. Through those engagements, what emerged was Transnet had developed a strategic direction in terms of gas, and had been the party that was most aligned to the development opportunity with regards to infrastructure development in terms of our plans in the Western Cape. And hence we developed our memorandum of cooperation with Transnet. In terms of, and perhaps our Transnet colleagues can talk to that direction a little later. In terms of significant interest in the project, yes, I think that there's the next steps in terms of the design and logistics is exactly the work that we're doing now with Eskom, is to provide some of that logistical operations, what could be done in that piece of work, so that we could then identify, at least on a small scale development, how we can start seeding gas into the Western Cape. In terms of the Infrastructure Development Act, my understanding is that that act then led to what I understand as strategic infrastructure projects, which was led in the previous regime and referred to as SIPs. Operation Pakisa emerged out of one of those SIPs, as I understand it, and through Operation Pakisa, the fast-tracking process has been the strategic environmental assessment as one of the arms for that, and that strategic environmental assessment is specific to LNG pipelines, and that as I mentioned has been finalized. I think it was a year-long process with the leg of Saldanha to Atlantis and the pipeline leg from Atlantis to Cape Town as two of the pipeline areas that are needing to be considered. My understanding is that this would now migrate to the current PICC, the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Committee. But I think some of my other colleagues in Transnet could maybe speak a little bit more to that. On fast tracking, Honourable Chair, what does it mean practically? So our approach has been to work on that anchor customer, and this is the work that we happy to have secured, again, more USDA funding, but specifically to be able to get that anchor customer converted to natural gas, and that's the work that we're doing to fast track the process. On domestic use opportunities, Chair, City of Cape Town had also undertaken a study to understand what opportunities LNG offers to them from a potential gas utilities point of view. And so ideally, the opportunities come from reticulated gas infrastructure that one could put down, but it also offers a diversity of different fuel options. So aside from LPG, you would also have LNG as a potential alternative fuel. So that supports greater diversity, which then encourages greater energy security. The price points of LNG are typically lower than the price point of LPG, and that's really a function of the cost of development. LPG still requires. It's still a co-product of the refining process, whereas LNG is naturally available and then can be extracted and then transmitted. So there is infrastructure cost to do that, but it does benefit from a cost perspective. The impact of jobs. So the SAM model that was used looked at both direct and indirect jobs, and my understanding is that the number of 13,000 actually looks at both the direct and the indirect job outputs. I don't have the statistics around how much indirect and how much direct they are, and how much are induced in the area. But we can go back into that and look for that. Which other stations belong? Uncle, in terms of Eskom's RFI. Earlier this year, they not only looked at Ankelik, but they also looked at Khorikwa. In terms of the work that Transnet are undertaking, it actually looks at what would be the benefit of supplying, I think, the country with through the existing infrastructure. So there are also gas operations in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. Avon and Dadisa are the two power plants that are under public-private partnership with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy that could also be converted. But I think they could speak more around potential other stations that could be fueled with LNG. In terms of looking beyond IPSA for funding, our conversations with Transnet have been around really identifying and securing the pieces of work that are required, so that then we could get a sense of what amount of funding that might be required, and they've always been encouraged to look not just at IPSA but at the broader suite of offerings, not just from DBSA but others as well. In terms of which options we prefer from the DDET point of view. The Donkergat, so from a siting perspective of the three options that are in the bay, the extensive recreational activities around the Donkergat Peninsula, that area, actually make option number 3 less attractive than options 1 and 2. So at this stage, option 2, which is aligned to the port infrastructure development, is the one that is our preference at the moment. I think I've addressed the Horikwa question, Chair. In terms of provincial legislation that might be required, at this stage, I'm not aware of anything, and perhaps Joe can inform around whether there is something that could assist. And on the question of Eskom, I think I've answered that one because they've already released the RFI, and then on our memorandum of cooperation with Transnet. I think we've had good engagement with Transnet, and we're seeking to as I said, look at the recent study that they've just undertaken and identify the gaps, and then look at those gaps as feeding into the terms of reference for the piece that would go to DBSA under the IPSA funding opportunity. And I think the last question, Chair, around how LNG could revitalize rail infrastructure, I think it's squarely in Transnet's purview. I think I've covered everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, do you want to add anything, or can I go to the next persons?
I think you more or less can go to the next person, Chair. There's just 1 or 2 points that I just wanted to make, if that's okay. So the issue is, as AJ was saying, the next steps, in particular when procurement is concerned, will be open and transparent and fair. But I think that we have a few examples, for example, particularly around Kuba when it was built, around how, as AJ was saying, one can successfully use procurement and add in their conditions of skills transfer. Kuba power station, when it was built, and particularly when they contracted the French to help build them, was incredibly good at doing that, to make sure that we localize as many of those jobs as possible, particularly in the sort of ongoing outer years of the actual project after it's been developed. So I think the idea is also how smartly we are procuring when the project does get, and if it does get developed. So that's the first thing. The second thing is LNG obviously is a potential source to generate energy, but it's also a direct energy source as well, as I think Honourable Member van der Westhuizen understood. But it's also not just about the costs, but it's about the efficiencies. So it has particular properties that electricity can't or doesn't have. And it basically means that we are able to develop new industries that we currently don't have because we don't have LNG. So an example would be ceramics, right? So they need kind of boilers that can switch on instantly, which you can't necessarily do with electricity because it takes a longer time to warm up. So the job numbers that we basically see are not necessarily and cannot reflect those new unexploited opportunities. And so we project, although we officially can't, but we project that the job count as a result of having LNG in the province will be much, much higher than what's currently reflected. So I just thought that I'd add that as just to add on to what AJ had basically said. But maybe we could ask our colleagues through your chair to perhaps if they wanted to add anything.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I'm going to start with Saldanha by IDZ. Ms. Vierkes, are you still online?
Yes, thank you, Jay. I am online.
Okay. Anything that you would like to add, or any view that you have on the presentation, or anything like that you would like to indicate?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to the department for the presentation. We have nothing substantive to add in terms of the presentation that was given, only to say that to support what AJ was talking about, the wide area of the demand validation, which is an area that we, as the entity, we're also looking at our energy demand analysis, and that's a focus area for us over the next year and a half, because things are developing in our pipeline that would contribute to and need to also be validated should we go beyond our current energy envelope that we have. So we're committed to doing that internally and also working with the department on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beekers. Econ? It just says, is everyone still online? Is Econ still with us? Mr. Mahononyane? Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, Chair, I'm sure this thing, Avi can comment and I can come through as well.
No problem. Mr. Singh, are you with us?
Yes, I am, Honorable Chair. Chair, thanks for the presentation. I think it was very informative.
Thank you.
Maybe I can also...
If you have any comments or any questions, you're welcome to put that now.
All right, thank you. Maybe just it's a comment. I've seen the development around the Saldanha area. I just need to get some sort of indication, because you're talking about a pipeline that goes from Saldanha to Cape Town, and then there's a node to Atlantis. Is there any sort of, I know we're in a development phase currently, but is there any sort of timeframes as to when we expect this to be implemented? That's the one point. The second point was around the Mosul Bay area. Are there any plans also in developing the Mosul Bay area, considering Kharikwa is located in that area? And if we need to then convert the gas, it'd be good to know what the plans are in terms of developing those areas. And in terms of the OCGTs that Eskom currently have, both Unkellig and Kharikwa have already have dual fuel burners installed in them. So the turbines have already been upgraded, so we can operate them on gas. What we currently have done is we went out on an RFI in order to get the balance of plant work done. So we're currently in that process, look at who the role players currently are out there, so we can look at how we can develop that part of the plant to receive the gas. And we also are currently, I think Mr. Trickham also indicated, we also are busy developing a business case to look at sourcing gas, which will then inform, we'll go out an RFP later on in the year or at a later stage. So at this point in time, I just need to understand, because the major infrastructure talks primarily towards CCGT type of conversion. So I just need to get some alignment in terms of the timeframes around the development of this project and how that will feed into Eskom's plans. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Singh. Transnet, are you still on the line with us? Ms. Lund or Mr. Mhlagluka?
Thank you, Chair. I'll start off with a few comments and then ask my colleague Jabulani Sitole to add. First of all, thank you for inviting us to listen to the presentation. As AJ has said, we've been working with the Western Cape government for some time under our Memorandum of Cooperation, and just to confirm, we remain very committed to that process. Perhaps just a bit of context. First of all, that we are very familiar with the USTDA study, and we are viewing it within the context of the wider demand for LNG in the country as a whole. We have been working on an interport solution to identify a least cost infrastructure configuration for port infrastructure development, so that we can ensure that LNG is landed in the country at the lowest possible cost to the end user. And I say this because the infrastructure cost is quite a significant component of that final landed LNG price. So not just the molecule landing, but the cost of repaying the infrastructure via the throughput in that infrastructure is a key element of the cost buildup. So it's very important from a country point of view that we keep that infrastructure cost as efficient as we possibly can. And with a new industry like LNG, we have to find a way to seed the market at the least possible cost. We've got no doubt that once LNG is starting to circulate in the economy, that the uptake will be significant. Because the LNG price ultimately does compete with diesel prices and with LPG prices. And it is government's policy to introduce gas to power as it has announced in the Integrated Resource Plan. So we're working closely with the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy to find these solutions. I can certainly confirm that the Port Authority has got port development plans that reflect the importation of LNG at the ports of Saldanha, Ngqura, and Richards Bay. And likewise, the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy confirmed that those are the 3 import points that the department has identified for LNG. In terms of moving work from studies to project prep, I think this is probably a key point that we would want to emphasize, is that one needs to have much closer verified demand in order to design a commercial solution. So there have to be off-takers that are going to sign up to the purchase of LNG and sign up to the use of the terminal infrastructure, because that is what allows the infrastructure to be banked and for finances to be raised for the development of that infrastructure. So as AJ confirmed, it is very important to get this verification in place. Now, one of the key areas will be gas to power and the conversion of the existing diesel peakers from diesel to gas. And of course, in the Western Cape, that includes both Unkellig and Gerikwa. So certainly from a Transnet point of view, we very much support the approach that the Western Cape government is taking to work with Eskom and on the Unkellig solution and to begin to get a better sense of the costs of and the options on the infrastructure for getting LNG or regasified actually natural gas through to Unkellig to be able to use in that facility. In terms of DMRE gas to power, the Integrated Resource Plan does indicate the timing of the gas to power coming into the grid. And I know that DMRE is working on the plan in respect of those determinations at the moment. So perhaps, Chair, it would be helpful to get a report back from the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy on their progress in that regard. And I can't really indicate more on that matter. In terms of the Port Authority and the regulatory environment, perhaps just to confirm and re-emphasize that the Ports Act is very precise on the award of terminal operator licenses and concession agreements. The Port Authority has to go through a competitive process to award those rights. And obviously the bidders who would bid for the rights to develop an LNG import terminal would have to be certain on the gas offtake and the gas supply agreements that they could enter into. The other regulatory point of view on this is with respect to NERSA. that regulates gas in terms of the Gas Act. So there are quite a number of moving parts on the regulatory front, both in terms of DMRE's gas to power determinations and NERSA's provisions for gas storage and transmission, and the Port Authority's regulations with respect to the award of terminal operator rights. So, Chair, I guess what I'm saying is that this is quite a complex field to unlock, but I must say I do think that there is a renewed focus by all parties involved to try to find a way to make sure that we can, in fact, see LNG landing in the South African economy in the foreseeable future. And I can assure you that from Transnet's point of view, we're doing everything we can to support a comprehensive solution that is going to give South Africa the best possible landed cost of LNG to support both our electricity generation sector and industrial uptake. Chair, in terms of engagements with funding options for project prep, certainly we continue to explore all of those options. But for us, it's very important to get these policy alignment matters sorted before we move into detailed project preparation. So that is our first priority. And then in terms of your question about LNG revitalizing the rail sector, perhaps there are two elements to this question. One is that we do believe from international experience that what is called virtual pipelines will be an important part of the uptake of LNG into our economy. And by that, we mean really the movement of liquefied natural gas in ISO containers, either by road or rail. And in Europe, this is quite extensively used. They use both regasified gas through pipelines as well as virtual pipelines of these isotainers. It is a very efficient way to get LNG to areas that are not necessarily on a pipeline route. And certainly it would help to support a lot of industrial offtake or uptake in gas. So certainly from a rail sector point of view, on the long haul, we have identified that there would be an opportunity to move LNG isotainers on rail. And in our port planning for LNG, we are making sure that there are going to be staging sites where truck loading both onto road and onto rail can take place from the terminal within the port. So from an infrastructure planning point of view, we are making provision for that. In respect of LNG as an energy source for rail, there is work internationally on using LNG in locomotive traction, but it's not a widely used technology at this point in time. And there aren't plans at the moment to have LNG as an energy traction source for rail, but it's not, one can't rule it out as a future potential. We are watching the developments in other countries with respect to the technology in this regard, and our engineering and R&D teams are in touch with global trends. So I hope that addresses that question, Chair. Chair, if you'll allow me, could I ask if Jabu Sitoli would like to add any matters that I might not have covered?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Lund. And also, I just wanted to ask if you can just repeat the three port plans that you're looking for LNG importation. I heard Saldanha, but I didn't hear the other two before you just go on to your colleague.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Chair. So it's the ports of Saldanha, the port of Mocha in the Eastern Cape, and the port of Richards Bay in KZN. Those are the three import points for LNG that are already in the port development plans.
Thank you so much. I'll hand over to your colleague now before we go back to the department.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sue. I just wanted to
raise a couple of points which I think are quite critical to the discussion. At the beginning, Mr. Trickham indicated that we were busy with the Richards Bay project. But I think it's important to note that when the announcement that was provided by the Minister of Energy came up in 2019, Transnet went back to update the scope of work to look at an interport solution. I think Sue referred to that briefly. But what that basically means is that we actually updated the scope of work to look at providing an infrastructure solution that brings LNG to all of the ports that require gas. And so we looked at about 12 scenarios that looked at either bringing in gas through Richards Bay as a hub, and Ngquga and Saldanha Bay as spokes, or Ngquga as a hub and the others as a spoke, or Saldanha Bay as a hub and the rest as spokes. And the reason for that was for us, in line with the indication that Sue has referred to, we need to ensure that the gas lands in South Africa at the least cost to the economy. And we already know that diesel is the most expensive, followed by LPG, and LNG is lower in terms of cost per molecule than both of those. So it is easy to displace diesel and LPG. And then we also know that coal, although it is very cheap at the moment, the environmental challenges and the carbon tax that is being introduced is actually getting it to be to start getting more expensive, because if you're using coal, you also have to come up with ways of dealing with your carbon footprint. And obviously, as you pay for that, it increases the price of your energy. And LNG, is the lowest energy, is the lowest carbon footprint energy source in terms of the fossil fuel. So that's why we believe that LNG coming into the various ports is quite important. And talking to one of the honorables' question with regards to the number of jobs that are being created, this talks to the question that IJ was referring to of the 13,000 jobs. But that is 13,000 jobs that are related to just the infrastructure. The fact that you are bringing in gas also creates multiplier effect into the economy, because now you are able to move the gas through virtual pipelines throughout the country and not only to parts of the country. And the fact that you've got expensive diesel that is running power stations like Ankerlech, bringing in LNG is going to help with the fuel cost. And that obviously helps with the electricity tariff that we as individuals end up paying. So that's one of the important reasons why LNG is so important. I think the outcomes of the study that we've been looking at has come out, and it actually does look like, in order for us to maximize the benefit to the economy, there is a need to look at the whole country. But that requires also decisions to be made by government. And those are some of the discussions that needs to happen. And we from a Transnet perspective can only provide the information. In terms of the other issue that was being referred to, of Transnet being able to go on this alone, I think it's quite important to note that we are actually planning to collaborate with private sector. These types of technologies have not been done in South Africa, so there's a need for us to collaborate with private sector who have done this elsewhere in the world, but also to bring the skills into South Africa, so that going forward, as we discover our own gas reserves, like the shale gas that we are talking about, the Brupada fields that Total has talked to, the Ipubesi and Kudu fields that are on the west coast, we can be able to then use the skills that we've gained in order to grow the economy of the country. So that's one thing that I wanted to just bring forward, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Sitole. To the department, I'm going to allow you now to answer some of the questions that were raised by our stakeholders from Saldanha, Eskom and Transnet. And after that, I'm going to open for another round of questions from members or for follow-up questions if they don't have any new questions. Thank you. Ms. Johnson and Mr. Trickham, I'll allow you to indicate which questions you will deal with.
AJ, do you? Well, I think, Chair, if you don't mind, I think Transnet basically complemented more than directed questions at us, and I'm not quite sure if I'm correct with that, but I think that they just simply strengthened and added to the comments that we had made. That's the first thing. And then Eskom provided, I think, a direct question around the Mosul Bay opportunities. So we understand and fully support the Brupada development, and we're hoping that that would expand going forward. But I think just to add on to what both AJ as well as Transnet had basically said is that the energy, LNG as an energy source is really important. It's a lot more cost effective than LPG and coal, and also a lot more efficient. So it gives rise to new opportunities in industries, but it also secures and makes them a lot more sustainable because of the efficiency of the LNG as an energy source. So that's the first thing. But we also, within that context, we need to understand that LNG as an energy source for electricity is simply an anchor tenant. That's not necessarily the only utilization of it. So effectively, wherever you import it, it needs to actually have fairly easy access also to industrial activity. And at the moment on the Garden route, there is not as much industrial activity as you'd find in the city of Cape Town, and also given the developments that we have in the West Coast and particularly around the IDZ. So for us, having LNG basically means that we can strengthen our economic and manufacturing sectors, which is not necessarily, given the logistics, easily realizable if it's located in Mosul Bay. So from certainly our studies that we had looked at, Saldanha Port within the Western Cape anyway would be the preferred ports, and I think that the studies and the research basically point to that. But AJ, I don't know if there's additional things that you may want to add.
Thanks, Joe and Chair. If I may, the two things I want to add is the reason the 3 ports were identified, amongst many other reasons, but one of the main ones was that they are all deep sea ports. And so they allow for the kind of vessels that we're talking about in terms of LNG tankers. So that's the first one. The second point, and I think it's talking to Mr. Singh's questions around timeframes. When we undertook the study at the time in beginning 2018, it was anticipated that we would have development up to 2024. So 2024 was anticipated as being the date when we would have all of the development options concluded by. And I think that was ambitious, and we had already at that point in time seen it as ambitious, but we had taken our cue, I think, from some of the policy documents at the time that presented themselves. On the development path for the projects, including the pipeline, I think this is part of the work that we're wanting to explore in the next phase of work for Eskom and Unkellig to support that business case that Avi spoke to. But in supporting the business case, we also want to understand from that small-scale development and logistics, how can we start providing some of the underpinning work required for some of what Sue mentioned. So if we understand that isotainers may provide the ideal opportunity to supply Unkellig at low capacity factors, then what is the benefit of industry piggybacking on those isotainers to be able to convert their own current generation diesel or otherwise to the use of isotainers as well? So that's the purpose that we have with regards to that study, is not only to develop that supply chain to Unkellig, and it could start off very well with the isotainers. And as Avi mentioned, the conversion processes have already kicked off with the conversion of the dual fuel nozzles, and right now they're looking at the balance of plant. But the critical thing is that the volumes that are required at an operational profile of Unkellig for a certain period of time would start changing the amount of gas, and as well as the infrastructure requirements for that gas. So that's as I said, that's the scope of work that we've put forward, and we're awaiting the mandate, internal mandate that's being pushed by Avi's colleagues in Megawatt Park right now under Group Capital Development, and we have a draft MOU already with them, which their legal services are inspecting at this stage. So very much trying to push that line so that we can actually make sure that the study then informs that the next step in terms of the RFP that Avi mentioned would go out, and that business case. So that's the only other thing. And just want to thank Sue and Jabu for just also expanding on some of the other elements that I hadn't covered. But definitely, as you might notice, that very much aligned to our approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Trickham. Colleagues, members, I'm going to now allow for another round of questions, especially given that it's such technical details that we are dealing with. You might have follow-up questions. Going once. Honourable van der Westhuizen, you may go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I do hope I'm audible. Chair, I think one of the major questions is obviously the uptake of energy, of gas, of diesel by Unkellig. And my question, well, I first want to make a statement. I believe that Eskom would have gone to great lengths to study and to predict and to obviously also adjust their predictions in terms of the reliability of their fleet of electricity generators. And it is my impression that, you know, contrary to what was probably expected a number of years ago, that eventually Unkellig has been running and Goriqua at far longer hours than what was anticipated. Now, this is a long-term investment that we're looking at. And I'm wondering, and I can admit that this might be sensitive commercial information, but in terms of the future of Unkellig, because I also realize that you would like Ankerlig to be used as little as possible, because it is your most expensive way to generate electricity. But what are your predictions in that regard? Isn't it that the calculations now actually look far more favorable to do that investment in terms of switching over to liquefied natural gas than it was probably even in 2018? So, Chair, perhaps if Eskom wouldn't mind just sharing with us, in terms of from their point of view, the viability for them to invest more heavily, and taking into account what was said initially, that obviously the more we move towards what is called the sustainable movement and wind and solar, renewable energy, that the role of Ankerlig may become even more important than what it is already now. So what are those factors, the number of hours that we can expect, and to what extent is that actually currently exceeding what was taken into account when the study was done? Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Before I take Honourable Nkondlo's question, for Eskom, the questions that Honourable van der Westhuizen asked, if there is something that is confidential information in terms of business sensitivity, please could you just indicate before you answer, and also in terms of the reasoning, for example, if in terms of a financial act, if it's sensitive information. For example, last year we got some information from ArcelorMittal directly in terms of energy questions, which was sensitive information, and which in terms of law, the members are required to keep it confidential. But please, before you answer, if it is confidential, please just indicate. So otherwise I can't help protect you if you reveal it and then you tell us that it's confidential information. Honourable Nkondlo, you may go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the responses, because I think some of my questions have been answered, I think, in the explanations. But I think I just want to make one comment before I ask the new questions. I think whilst I take the issue of, some of the triple effects, or the explanation about jobs that may not necessarily, been represented in the number that is there. I think as the different stakeholders, especially on projects of this nature, government in particular, will have to do more, to quantify, because I think for me, the biggest issue is that if we're able for trying to ensure market feasibility of any project, we're able to build in the necessary data with modeling of this and the other. I think we should do the same, in terms of these things that are more pertinent, especially for a developing country like South Africa. So for me, if we talk about, what are the jobs that are there, and somebody says, no, over and above this, we must consider there and there and there, which is not necessarily part quantifiable in the studies or the presentations that you are making, I think we'll be shortchanging, what then will be able to make people comfortable and put support the same way that we do, when we want industry to participate and we give more clarity on information. So I think for me, that is one comment, especially on socio-economic benefits of this project, because these things at the end of the day, are the numbers that we need to be able to monitor once these projects have been approved and once they are implemented. Now, we can't talk about something that was not there. The expectation for me is that the 13,000 job, both direct and indirect, is what now we are told about now. If something happens elsewhere, it becomes a bonus. So I think that's just one comment I wanted to make on the matter. The new questions, Chair, is that, look, in the bundled versus the unbundled approach, I was actually interested to hear the various stakeholders that are working in this project. that what is the preferred, and if there is any official position from the department, Eskom, Transnet, who the stakeholders that are working on this project, what exactly is the preferred position between the particular models, or are we talking about, a combination of the two? I think that for me is one thing that I would like to get an answer on. And I'm interested, I think also, what is the difference between the two studies? That is one, the study of the province and the one of the city, which actually both of them was funded by the same USTDA. So I'll be interested just to understand, is there a difference in the scope? Can somebody, if you're looking, to read that particular study, get something completely different, from what was the scope of the provincial study? And then to the department specifically, I hear, I think Mr. Trickham earlier on when he started the presentation, he made mention that the energy game changer in terms of the structure and the institutional model of the strategy has changed. I think it ended in March. So I'm just wanting to understand that this particular work now, where is it located in terms of how is it going to be championed in the new, I think, strategy of the department? I'll be interested just to understand what then becomes that a function, that will actually continue to follow, will continue to follow on, in terms of continuing with the project itself. And then in this, I'm not sure whether it was answered. I think maybe one of the stakeholders came closer to my question, because I wanted to understand in this verification of the demand that needs to happen, especially now post-COVID, sort of we can get to a point where, we've got what I think I had here, sort of an anchor client, an anchor market for the LNG. By when will that work be concluded, where such efforts that I'm hearing from Transnet and everybody else are committed, to actually ensure that gets to be fast-tracked, and who is the lead implementer or agent who is driving, that aggregation or verification of the demand? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Nkondlo. And then I have one follow-up that I'd just like to add as well. Apologies, Honorable Nkondlo, I'm just going to quickly mute you because there's some background noise. My follow-up question is, with regards to the high skills that was spoken of previously, and the level of skills that we're going to need in terms of such infrastructure development, and this is more related to both the department and Saldanha Bay IDZ. I wanted to find out how can Saldanha Bay IDZ assist in training and development of the skills that is needed for a project and for infrastructure development such as this. And previously, Saldanha Bay IDZ indicated to us in committee that they were struggling with CETA applications and funding for some of their programs, and these training is related to the IDZ and obviously for future uptake of learners. And I just wanted to find out what the progress is regarding the respective CETA funding. Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to allow for the department to take their questions first, and then I will take Eskom, Saldanha, Transnet in terms of answering if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, and if Jo would like to, she can indicate whether she wants to take up any of the questions. On the question from Honourable Pendereisen around the uptake of gas by Unkellig and the studying of reliability of the generators, I think that is a different study that looks to the operations and maintenance cycle, and I would leave it to Mr. Singh to answer that question. But what I would like to say is that in our study, in our feasibility study, we had actually looked at under various utilization factors from a range from around 7% right up to around 35%, which was the the number that was used in the IPP office studies, we looked at what would be the fuel cost savings from Unkelech. So there is a graph that shows that it's figure 90 in the study, and it shows some of the cost savings that would benefit from various utilization factors of that, and it increases from $200 $200 million US dollars in 2024, and then depending on what you see, you'll get to an increased value. So just to indicate that there is some information. It's not sensitive. It is in public domain, and it has been modeled. But Eskom might want to add more. Moving on to Honourable Nkondlo's question around bundled and unbundled approach. I think the preferred approach is which option gets us to gas quicker in the marketplace. So it's a reason why we followed both approaches, so that we could understand if an unbundled approach takes longer, then it would take longer to seed the market. So the combination of the two is actually what we're pursuing at the moment. And the unbundled approach is exactly the approach that is aligned to the thinking that Transnet have put forward. And this is because it starts reducing the complexity of some of the arrangements that need to be made. And you could make any kind of investments around that infrastructure pipeline in a much more measured and controlled manner. And if there's any issues around it, it's an area of a more controllable nature. So for me, the unbundled approach is the preferred approach, but we're not going to prejudice that against a bundled approach. And if the bundled approach appears, then we've made allowance for that. And in the study, for the bundled approach, it would actually be new gas power generation, because the bundled approach talks to the gas IPP process of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. So for what we've explored in the study, we've looked at a 1,000 megawatt plant, a new 1,000 megawatt plant that would form part of that gas IPP program. In the IRP 2019, 3,000 megawatts have been identified. I think it's in 2026, and so that's the link to the bundled approach. 1,000 megawatt plant. It will be greenfields and located from our perspective anywhere between Saldanha and Atlantis. In terms of the difference between the two studies, between province and the city study focused on really the benefits, a couple of areas. The first one was the city itself has some existing diesel generators that not diesel, existing small turbines that are operated right now on aviation gas. What would be the benefit of moving to LNG, but also what would be the benefit of smaller LNG plants that the city would seek to utilize in terms of their network. And then the second part of it is what would be the benefit of setting up a gas business for the city around its utilities prospects. So similar to how water as a utility and electricity as a utility, what would be the prospects of gas as a utility? So the scope of work is quite different to the scope of work of province, and it was premised on the fact that gas would be available through Unkelech. It also investigated some of the reticulation that would be required within the city prospects. So there's some technical detail on reticulation requirements there. In terms of the game changer ending in March, this work prior to the game changer ending was already a piece of work that I had taken on in my directorate, and the work of the game changer has been mainstreamed into the department through my directorate at the moment. So there is continuity in the project itself, and it is continued to be championed through myself in terms of this project. In terms of the verification of demand, the anchor client by when these steps will be concluded. A lot of this, a lot of what you can see from the complexity of the arrangements is dependent on structures existing within Eskom and within Transnet. And in terms of the lead implementer, because of the complexity of the project, it varies according to what the objective is. So in terms of the lead implementer for Untitled, which is what we see as a first step towards seeding gas into the Western Cape, the lead implementer there would actually be Eskom. And so we would be dependent on when they would release their RFP and the work that they're doing, and that's why we're seeking to support them in this and fast track that process to get that sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, the key thing here is one would want to make sure that all the due diligence is undertaken, and that's why it necessitates the study of these various options to build the correct business case for that RFP and the technical specifications that might be required thereof. In terms of the I think similarly it's on the large scale infrastructure solution. Again, the work that Jabulani detailed that of the interport solution is the area that Transnet is the lead implementer. And then the last point is on the bundled approach. The lead implementer there would be the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy. And as mentioned by Ms. Lunt, the department has, as we understand it, has been working on a gas plan, and we have yet to engage the department on it, but we understand that that is part of their scope of work for in terms of their annual performance plan. On the skills levels and required, just a small comment, and that is that similar to the shale gas skills requirement, I think there is a considerable need for skills to be addressed, because the skills, even the institutions for the high skills levels, are not present in the country. So there are pockets of excellence which have arisen. So I'm aware that there's some pockets of excellence existing currently out of some of the skills that have been developed as a result of both Untitled and Coburg infrastructure, and those pockets are actually, some of the skills are actually being exported to the US, etc. So there are some pockets, but for the scale of it, I think there's a greater need for those skills requirements. And as I mentioned, the follow-on study that SOGA would be wanting to undertake is to really expand upon that preliminary study that they've undertaken. That's my final comment. That's my comments at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If the next stakeholder could then now answer the questions for them. I think I indicated Eskom is next. Are there any questions you need to deal with that were asked?
Yeah, Honourable Chair, it was just the one question, I believe, and thank you for protecting me. I think we're going through a commercially...
Mr. Singh, can you hear us? Mr. Singh, I think I've lost some sound there by you.
Sure, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. Thank you, Mr. Singh.
Okay, yeah, so I was just saying that we're actually embarking on a commercial process currently, so I wouldn't like to disclose any specific information that relates to that matter because it is commercially sensitive. I would like to just say rather that Eskom is definitely keen on moving away from diesel production to LNG. The economic benefits are there. The cost of dollars per gigajoule for LNG is cheaper than that of diesel. And as COVID perhaps goes away, we assume that the market will normalize in terms of the diesel prices, and there'll be a greater variance between the price of LNG and diesel. And therefore, the gains from that will be had when we embark on that conversion. And the more we utilize the plant with that saving, obviously means there's greater economic benefit. Obviously, to the end consumer, there are also benefits associated with that. All I would like to just highlight, Chair, that is Eskom is committed to move away from diesel production to LNG. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Since some information is commercially sensitive, if you wish to submit that in writing with a confidential or sensitivity note, you're welcome obviously to do that to the committee, or if the committee requests such information specifically. If that is then done in that manner, I also then ask that you just put the reasoning or the legal terminology why it's commercially sensitive, as well as possibly even putting a password on, because if commercially sensitive information is sent to us, it does make the members also insiders. So just so that they are aware then if you do submit such information. I'm going to then go on to Saldanha Bay for their questions.
Thank you, Chair. Not a question from our side, but to answer your question on the skills and the CETA funding that you raised. So we cannot agree more with what the department has said now in respect of the having the education ecosystem that would support and actually realize better socioeconomic goals and the reality that we would all want from the, moving to gas and having a gas-based industry and economy. So the role that we play has been focusing on the skills required in the oil and gas and maritime sectors. So there is some translation to, if you can imagine operating such a gas terminal, particularly in the artisan spaces, but we are not near enough at the scale as a country and as a province to focus on the engineering skill sets that we require. So we remain committed to focusing on the artisan trades, because we see that as a moderate opportunity that we can quickly grasp, because number one, a lot of our tenants are in manufacturing, and secondly, the building of all of these, the construction of all of our facilities over the next while will also rely a lot on construction and artisan skill sets. But despite this, when we did the site visit, when the committee came out for the site visit earlier this year, just before the lockdown, we informed you and also we've shared with you our feasibility studies on the Innovation Campus project. And a critical component of introducing innovation technology companies and that sector to the IDZ is also about the linkage to higher education and further education that it enables. So we are progressing. Our timelines have shifted out because of COVID in that regard. We wanted to do the more engagement with the schools this year, but we have had to shift out our timelines. And however, I will say that with the Department of Education, we are still committed to introducing the new revitalized curriculum in maths, in particular in the high schools that we've partnered with next year in the grade 8 and grade 9. And I would welcome an opportunity when the committee is able to actually give you a detailed briefing on the work that we've been doing in that regard, because I think it's part of the ecosystem development for industrialization and the growth of the economy. With regards to the CETA funding, in the latest news is that we have had some delays with concluding, obviously in implementing some of the programs that we had targeted for Q1 for this financial year because of the lockdown. and we still require co-funding for the funding that we have received from Masita. We are engaging with the department in that regard, and those talks are continuing. We have been very successful, luckily, with another SETA, the local government SETA, for 2 new funding agreements. And so, but as we had said in the site meeting, in the site visit and in our briefing, that in the response to questions that we provided the committee thereafter, it is still a very unassured space, if I can say that, because we do rely heavily on the SETAs approving our applications. So it is a very competitive process with any other training facilitator that we need to compete with to ensure that we do the training that we are required to do in order to meet our socio-economic mandate. Thank you.
Thank you. And Transnet, are there any questions you need to pick up on?
Thank you, Chair. I think it was only the one question around our approach to the bundled, unbundled discussion. I can just briefly indicate that our approach to the planning to date has been for an unbundled solution, and the reason for that is that we are seeking to ensure the establishment of common user regulated midstream infrastructure that will support multiple off-takers, not only power off-takers. So we want to make sure that we encourage competition in gas supply over time, and that the regulated infrastructure allows for various users to enter into gas supply agreements and to make use of the infrastructure. We know, however, that it is necessary to secure significant anchor tenant utilization of the terminal infrastructure from the beginning in order to bank the infrastructure. But we do believe that it's necessary to create the future facilities that will encourage multiple users over time. So our preferred approach is unbundled. That's not to say that bundled can't work. It will work. It will support gas to power, but it just makes it a bit more difficult to ensure competition in gas supply over time, and particularly to encourage the capacity for industrial use uptake over time. Thank you, Chair. I don't think there's anything further from our side.
No, I think those were all. Thank you so much. Given that we have 15 minutes left of the meeting, I would like to take the rest of the time for the members to submit their resolutions. And I do hope that with the respective stakeholders, that as a committee, perhaps we can even come and do oversight over some of the projects or development of the projects as it goes along. We've already obviously done oversight at Saldanha IDZ, but there's much that we still need to see and hear and engage upon. And I would like to thank the department for presenting to us today. The study has been quite comprehensive, and we appreciate the amount of work that has obviously gone into it. And I would also like to thank Saldanha by IDZ. I would like to thank Eskom. I would like to thank Transnet for being here today with us. You weren't presenting, but it's always wonderful having the respective stakeholders in the meeting and knowing that we are all essentially on the same WhatsApp group. But to the officials, you are welcome to leave the meeting now, and the members will obviously now engage on possible resolutions going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the opportunity. And can I also thank and express my appreciation to our partners, Transnet and Eskom, with regards to this particular initiative.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair. Bye.
Members,
Thank you, Chair.
thank you, bye.
Thanks,
Members, just as the officials are leaving, if we can just please remain online. Okay. Members, I'm going to now allow for any resolutions that members would like to put. Going once, going twice, or do I start? Honourable van der Westhuizen, I see your hand.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I first would like to propose that we, as a committee, decide to monitor the progress with this potential project on an ongoing basis, perhaps even coming back every 6 months or every 9 months, because it is a long-term project. And I think it's a very important one, and it's not part of the resolution, but I want to thank you for putting it on the table and for inviting the department and the other role players. That is the first one from my side, Chair. The second one is somewhat related, but I didn't want to ask a question in the meeting because we concentrated on Saldanha and the West Coast and so on. But my second question would be that we, as a committee, also try to see if we can invite representatives from Mosgas to a future meeting of the committee. It has been reported in the last week that it's generally known that Mosgas's reserves will be running out by December of this year. And I think we're also looking at 1,000 job opportunities, plus obviously the secondary industries in that area. And it seems as if they mum on this one. And I think it's important just in terms of their responsibility towards the country, because Petro SA is government owned, that they play open cards so that, I think what economists and business people want is certainty. They want to be able to find alternatives if they can no longer rely on work coming from Mosgas, etc. So if we could ask that we invite representatives of Petro SA, Mosgas to a future meeting of the committee. Those two from my side, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. The first resolution from Honourable van der Westhuizen, is everyone happy with us monitoring the progress on the LNG importation? If no objections, Honourable Nkondlo, your hand is up.
Yes, Chair. I wanted to say I fully support, because I was also going to make that similar proposal, that given the scale of this project and its importance, I think we need those frequent follow-ups just to understand where the project is, what type of bottlenecks are being experienced by the department and the other stakeholders. And where do we play our role in that? But also, I think given that already we've got the upcoming or the work that is being done in the Atlantis SEZ, I think for me, I see a lot of, alignment in terms of ramping up that potential and enabling that local investment there. So I would think it's a very important project. So I fully concur and support the view of Honourable van der Westhuizen. The second one I wanted just to place, Chair. I think the issues that were just raised by also the CEO of Saldanha ITZ, I am not sure, because I think this issue of funding, and I think I've always been raising this matter, especially of the development or transformation element, which includes the issues of skills. I think we will have to, at some point, consider how we try to either assist or try and get the necessary departments, that are working. I know, for example, that DDET had the skills focus, or what was termed the skills game changer, because I think we need to get that element robust and working to enable the issue of skills. Because I remember I think in the last administration, there was a time where Saldanha IDZ, could not realize, actually had funding, but then could not do the training. So we need to try and sort out or find a way, what role, I'm not saying we will be implementing, but what role can we play in enabling, sufficient funding, for Saldanha IDZ, especially as it relates to issues of skills development, so that the type of, opportunities that are unearthed through these big capital projects, locals, do not come up and end up being up in arms because they do not necessarily have the capacity or the skills requisite. So I think for me, that's one issue that I wanted to place as a second resolution. I'm sure, Chair, you would be able to summarize it. You normally help me in this regard of how would you coin it specifically. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Honourable Nkondlo. Okay, I'll just quickly go through the resolutions and I'll also then add mine and possible amendments. Honourable van der Westhuizen's one to monitor the progress regarding LNG. Everyone seems to be in agreement with that one. And the next resolution was to invite Moscas to the committee to engage with them. I would like to amend that particular resolution and suggest that instead of inviting Moscas to the committee in terms of virtual, that as a committee, we actually undertake an oversight visit to Mosul Bay, and that we visit or engage with Moscas, with Petro SA, with the respective municipality, with Gorikwa, which is an Eskom station, with Total SA, with Transnet, invite the department there, and also any manufacturing in terms of renewable energy or manufacturing companies in terms of possible for LNG, so that we can understand the progress in Mosul Bay and what is going on there at the moment. So that is my suggestion, that instead of just inviting one stakeholder, that we actually go to Mosul Bay and we engage all of them with an oversight visit. So before I go on to the next resolution, would members be happy with us engaging on such an oversight visit to Mosul Bay then, and including all the respective stakeholders?
Supported, Chair.
Okay.
Support, Chair. But if it's going to take too long to organize that, or if it's not feasible, because it seems to me as if there's a 3-month period and then everything is going to be potentially shut down.
Okay, so what I'll do is with the presiding officer, I will engage to find out how quickly we could do such an oversight visit, because ideally I do not want to only invite the one stakeholder, and because I do think that within energy and the gas industry, that it probably is a network and a chain of supply that we'll have to try and understand in that particular area. The next resolution, Honourable Nkondlo spoke about the skills and the development and how do we assist Saldanha Bay in terms of sufficient funding, and how does one understand where the funding comes from, and how in order to ensure that we can use those skills obviously for the infrastructure development that we potentially would like to see in the Western Cape. I would like to propose that we accept the Saldanha Bay IDZ CEO's proposal that we have a more in-detail briefing on the skills training and the education program that they would like to roll out. And perhaps then in such a briefing, we can then go into more detail specifically regarding skills and education within the oil, gas and maritime industry. Honourable Nkondlo, would you be happy with something like that?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
No. Okay, if there are no objections to that resolution, my second resolution I would like to suggest is there was a proposal from Transnet that we invite the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy in order to present the gas program plan. And I think that if we do invite them, for example, to do a presentation for us, that we also invite them to do a presentation on IPPs for us as well, and to understand the regulations that have also been put out regarding IPPs. Would members, My voice is going away. Would members be in support of such a resolution?
Supported, Chair.
Okay. If no objections further then my last resolution I would like to propose is that we also undertake an oversight visit. And we've previously obviously said we would like to go and visit Atlantis to see the Green Cape initiatives. But I would like to go further and suggest that we also then, if we go see the Green Cape initiatives, that we also then go see the Ankerlig power station from Eskom and ask them to show us around, show us the development, where the infrastructure development would occur and where the maintenance would have to occur. Also, for example, where the possible greenfields IPP would occur, and then again to obviously invite the respective stakeholders to such an oversight visit. Would members be okay with something like that? Yes,
You
no,
took
maybe.
the words from my mouth.
Okay, because that way we can then do the oversight visit at Ankerlig, Atlantis, that area, and we can also do the oversight visit in Mosul Bay with all of the stakeholders, because those two are essentially the two biggest areas where we're going to be engaging in terms of the energy sector in the future in the Western Cape currently with liquid natural gas. Members, are there any other resolutions? If none, members, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for supporting in terms of the lengthy presentation. I know it's been very technical in terms of energy expertise, but as we've said previously, it's not a sprint, it is a marathon. And over the years, I hope that we become as technically inclined as some of our colleagues in the various stakeholder relationships, and that we continue to build upon the stakeholder relationships we currently have. Members, thank you so much. With that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chairperson.